Hello and welcome to Voided Stories. Enjoy.
My name is John, and I am 30 years old. I met my wife Claudia, who is 28 years old, when I was in college. At that time, I was majoring in business economics, while Claudia was studying English. We first crossed paths at the house of a mutual friend. We hit it off pretty well and dated for a couple of years. Sometime after we both graduated, I decided to propose to her, and she said yes right away. That's the summarized version of our courtship, since I don't think there's anything really noteworthy in there. We've been married for 4 years now. I think I started to notice some changes in my wife. By the way, let me just say that her name is Claudia as a pseudonym. After we got married, I think about a year after it started, after she walked in on me and a female colleague together at a bar. I know it sounds bad, but it was an entirely innocuous situation. A bunch of us, co-workers, went out after work for some drinks, which isn't an unusual occurrence, and as people started to leave one by one, it was eventually only me and this colleague left at the bar. Claudia walked in with her friends, and they came to say hi to us. I returned the greeting normally because it's not like I felt like I was doing something wrong, but it was when Claudia got back home after me that everything hit the fan. When she walked in, she threw her purse down and came stomping towards me. She pointed a finger in my face and started screaming about how she caught me in the ACT cheating on her. I tried my best to tell her that wasn't the situation, but she honestly didn't let me get a word out. When she finally calmed down, only after calling me every terrible thing a person can call a cheater, I explained the situation to her, even showing her photos that the group of us had taken earlier that night. I also pointed out to her that I didn't react strangely when she came with her friends because I knew I wasn't doing anything wrong, and I had hoped it would be evident. After my explanation, she said okay, seeming to have finally understood. She stood there for a few seconds like she wanted to say something, and then she went into the room. This was quite some time ago, but it still irks me to this day that she never apologized after all of that. However, the reason why I'm retelling this whole episode is because that was the point where she seemed to become clingy and overly jealous. I would sense mood shifts if I looked in the direction of a woman or simply answered a few questions for a woman, even if she was just asking for directions. I also noticed that these rules didn't seem to apply to women who were very obviously not a threat. I think a sensible amount of jealousy is healthy because it allows for the enforcement of boundaries, but it's very easy to tell when it's excessive. In her case, it just seemed to become excessive after that episode, which didn't make sense to me because she had no reason to be so wary of me in the presence of other women. Most of the time, I'll know that an interaction with a woman has soured her because I'll notice a shift in her emotions, but it is only some of the time that she actually starts something. It's never a civil discussion, as she always gets emotional around the topic, and to say it drives me crazy is an understatement because she'll always cite the smallest thing as the reason she suspects me. For instance, there was a time when she caught me and one of the female neighbors in our apartment building talking in the hallway. We were literally just talking about some basic politics, and Claudia walked out of our apartment, saw us in the hallway, and walked back in. As soon as I saw that happen, I knew I'd be in for it at that very moment. I'll admit that I thought of divorce because honestly, I knew that I couldn't keep living that way. It was highly draining. The only thing was I felt like it'd be better for us to approach couples therapy first, at least before I ended things with her. After all, I love her. So we tried that, and truth be told, it helped at least in the immediate period, but things took a comedic turn when she felt the therapist was taking my side too often. And then the therapist was the next person who Claudia assumed was trying to sleep with me. I remember laughing out loud the day she expressed that thought. It didn't make the situation better, but I couldn't help it. We eventually switched to a male therapist, and with that, the sessions were at least able to go on much longer, at least until the point where it seemed like the changes were actually sticking in her head. We went several months without an incident, so it finally seemed like there was progress. Well, at least until the point that I'm writing this post about. The last several months have been normal, like how things were between us before the hyper-jealousy even became a thing. However, I think things blew up when Rebecca, the same colleague who was in the bar with me years back, came to the house to hand over some documents when I wasn't there, since I was meant to be working from home the next week. I think my wife recognized her from the first time around, and I don't know whether she had a Winter Soldier moment or whether it was simply because a woman came directly to the house looking for me, but all hell broke loose when I got back home. She started howling at me the moment that I walked through the door, and I was greeted with the documents being thrown in my face. She asked me why Rebecca knew where I lived, according to her. Before I could even answer, it was because I must have brought her there before to sleep with her. The real answer was simply that I had told her where I lived when she said she wanted to drop the documents off. It didn't help that Rebecca is quite a curvy woman. So it then moved into a rant about how I must like women who are more endowed than she is, and I must have been sleeping with them all over town. She even said she was going to get herself tested for STDs because she was entirely convinced that I had cheated on her numerous times. Once she was done raving, I walked into the house, took a few basic things that I would need, and I walked out. I honestly had nothing to say to her, especially not in that state. I also knew that no matter what I had to say, it probably wouldn't enter her head because when she's in that emotional state, the voice of reason doesn't get to her. I knew it'd be better for me to leave the house entirely, so I did that. I heard her shouting behind me, "Enjoy Rebecca's bed now." This happened very recently, and I've been sleeping in a hotel since then. The thing is, I am set on divorcing her because I really can't live several more decades of my life, best case scenario, dealing with a woman who thinks that I'm cheating with every other woman in existence. The problem is, I know that the therapy sessions help to some degree, and I'm fighting within myself, trying to figure out whether I should try and attend sessions with her again or whether I should just give up. I think this is the decision I need help with, so I'd love it if you could all give me your opinions and thoughts on the situation. Edit. I've noticed several comments suggesting that I've already done enough and that it's time to let go of our relationship. In many ways, I agree with this sentiment. I worry that, regardless of how many therapy sessions we go through, it might only take one small incident for her to revert to her extreme jealousy. This constant fear of triggering her insecurities is draining, and it's not fair to either of us. Living under such tight control is not sustainable, and I'm exhausted from constantly having to prove my fidelity. While I may not proceed with a divorce immediately, I am now more open to the idea than ever before. The thought of ending our marriage is heartbreaking, but it may be the only way for both of us to find peace. If this issue arises again, I think I'll be ready to end it for good. To be completely honest, living under such tight control is not sustainable, and I am exhausted. However, I also don't want to live with any regrets. Therefore, I plan to give her one last chance, but if it happens again, that will be the end for me. This last chance is not just for her, but also for me to be sure that I did everything I could to save our marriage. I'm not very hopeful though, so I'm slowly preparing myself for the possibility of being single again. The thought of starting over is daunting, but it's better than enduring a life filled with mistrust and constant accusations. I've reached a point where my mental health and well-being are more important than holding on to a relationship that causes me so much stress. It is what it is, and sometimes, letting go is the best thing we can do for ourselves. Update 1. Well, here's an update that I wasn't expecting at all, and I don't even know how to express how freaking pissed off I am with this new development. As I mentioned in my last post, I was starting to get more comfortable with the idea of divorce, but I wanted to give her one more chance to improve. The good thing is that it didn't take long for it to become clear that she's never going to get better, and she showed me in the most obvious way possible. I realized there was a problem when we attended a friend's barbecue. Claudia was being unusually touchy with someone there. We didn't know the person, but I asked the host, who is my good friend, and he told me that the guy was recently divorced and worked in the construction industry. I was concerned because my wife had never been so touchy with anyone but me, so it was obviously strange behavior. This was about 2 weeks after the last episode I described in my previous post. Anyway, I tried my best to keep an eye on her during the barbecue and avoided making a scene. When we got home, I spoke to her about it. She didn't seem apologetic and said, "Well, now you know how it feels then." That left me speechless because it was basically her admitting that she was rubbing up on that guy intentionally to make me jealous. It was so stupid to me since it wasn't even a sensible comparison. She gets jealous when other women speak to me. I've never thrown myself at them or gotten touchy. It was far from the same thing. She even added, "Are you just jealous because he's a handsome guy? Because he's more fit than you?" At that point, I walked out because I was starting to get to the point of anger where I wanted to hit something. She said nothing as I turned and left, and honestly, I knew for a fact that I was going to get in contact with a divorce lawyer. I didn't return to the house for 3 days. The funny thing is, even if I hadn't been sure enough, she solidified my decision the very next day. I got a call from my friend who hosted the barbecue. His name is Bill and he seemed pretty serious. He said we should meet, so I agreed. When I met him, he told me that his friend, the one Claudia was talking to, called him. According to him, the guy said that he had hooked up with Claudia the day before, which was the day after I left the house, and he wanted to know what Bill thought about her since she said she was single. I must have zoned out at that point because I honestly can't remember what was said after that. By hooked up, it seemed clear they had sex, and Claudia presented herself as single. The worst part is I might not have found out if the other guy hadn't talked to Bill about it. My head was spinning, and I didn't know what to think or how to proceed at that moment. Bill saw I wasn't paying attention, so he waited for me to come back. He said he told the guy that Claudia was married, and the guy seemed genuinely shocked. Apparently, she gave no indication that she was married, and he told Bill, "Forget I asked, and I'll forget about her immediately." Bill finished telling me all of this, and I went home right away to confront her. I didn't rehearse anything and was ready to let my pure anger guide me because, honestly, was there anything to rehearse that would best express how to handle someone who is cheating on you? When I walked back into the house, I wouldn't say she was in a good mood, but she was more chatty than usual after something like that. She still had an obvious attitude because the first thing she said was, "Didn't expect to see you back already," with a stupid grin on her face. She was clearly trying to rile me up, and it worked because the first thing I said was, "Shut up." I've never been so curt, and she seemed taken aback. I then said, "You slept with a guy from the barbecue. Don't even think of denying it. You cheated on me, Claudia." She stood there for a few seconds before sheepishly saying, "Now you know how it feels." It came out almost in a whisper, so I know she must have realized how stupid it sounded. I'm not proud of it, but I threw one of our ceramic kitchen ornaments at her feet. I was pissed off by that stupid comment because I've never even come close to cheating on her, so for her to see this as retribution was crazy. I can't remember what I said after this, but I remember a lot of cursing, screaming and explaining. I told her she was crazy if she thought this made any sense. I told her she had never caught me even close to cheating, that she constantly overreacted to the slightest interactions I had with women, and that she was delusional to think I had ever shown signs of unfaithfulness. I pointed out that all the things that triggered her were always women's actions toward me, never mine toward them. Despite the many times she accused me of cheating, she never had definitive proof of a single one. It was all in her head, and I told her she needed help. I think that was the moment I expressed everything I'd ever wanted to scream at her. When I was done, she said nothing. She just stood there. I asked if she had anything to say, but she said nothing at all and just shook her head slightly. I told her to pack a few of her things and leave. Again, she stood there for a bit before walking to the bedroom. She came out about an hour later with her suitcase packed, and I haven't seen her since then. This time, I definitely don't need any help figuring out what to do next. I've already contacted a divorce lawyer, and I really want to make sure I hurt her in the split because I've put up with way too much over the years. I'm so exhausted and annoyed that this is what it had to come to. I'll update you all once the divorce is finalized and I know where I stand. Update 2. I am incredibly happy to share this update and feel like a massive weight has been lifted off my shoulders. Honestly, I feel fantastic. In a previous post I described my extremely jealous wife who constantly accused me of cheating or being interested in other women. Her decision to intentionally make me jealous and then sleep with another man was the final straw. I quickly contacted a divorce lawyer, and it didn't take long for the papers to be prepared. I made sure she was served at her workplace. For context, she works at a publishing company, so I'm certain this created some office gossip. In fact, I know it did because she sent me an angry text that evening, accusing me of embarrassing her and being vindictive. Fast forward to the divorce proceedings, I realized I had messed up big time because I had no concrete evidence that she cheated on me. I didn't record my conversation with Bill or the confession from her affair partner. I tried to see if Bill could get the affair partner to admit it again, but that wasn't feasible. However, I managed to convince the court by explaining her jealousy, the couples therapy we attended, and recounting the entire story honestly. She attempted to spin the story in her favor from the start, but it was transparent. Thankfully, in the end, I received a very favorable outcome. I got to keep the house, which was fair since I lived there before she moved in. It was determined that there was no need for me to pay alimony, even though I earned more than her, because the difference wasn't significant enough and the judge didn't want to reward her behavior. Fortunately, we didn't have any children, which was a relief. I was glad to be free of any ties to her. I also think I got off easy because I agreed to let her take several pieces of furniture and appliances from the house. I did this mainly because I didn't want daily reminders of her around. So that's it, I'm finally free of her. While it's painful to realize that I spent so many years being falsely accused of cheating and then actually being cheated on, I'm relieved to be in a position where I know it won't happen again. Now, it's time to move on to the next chapter of my life.
If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe.